I am so thrilled to welcome Dr. Jennifer Finlayson Fife to the podcast, as she is an amazing therapist and colleague of mine. She has a PhD in counseling psychology from Boston College. She's a relationship and sexuality educator and coach, a licensed professional counselor, and she did her dissertation on LDS women and sexuality, which is why I wanted to invite her here today. She has amazing online courses and live workshops for individuals and couples to deepen emotional and sexual intimacy. And you can find those at finlayson-fife.com. I highly recommend them. I have several clients and friends who have taken Jennifer's courses. So I am thrilled to welcome Jennifer Finlayson Fife.
Thanks for having me.
So this month in Dr. Julie Hanks group coaching membership, we're talking about how do I claim my own sexuality? And I thought you would be the perfect person, since you've studied this and you're kind of the guru. So I want to start with a question like, how does LDS church culture and teachings, how has that shaped LDS women's sexuality in your research and experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that a couple of ways. So I think just out of the gate, given that we have a very conservative sexual ethic, and what I mean by that is that we have a very, that sex is legitimate and good, but only in the context of marriage. To do that means that it just creates more anxiety in general around sexuality. And that can be a problem. It can be turned into parents speaking in shameful ways, a lot of fear. If sex is next to murder, there's just that general anxiety that can really paradoxically create more preoccupation, but really interfere with integration. And what I mean by that is just being able to come to peace with the fact of your sexuality and to basically feel like you're an agent of your sexuality, that you're an actor and a chooser in your life around it. So that's just a general challenge that we have culturally. It doesn't mean it's the wrong way, because lots of people have anxiety around sex, but sometimes the way we teach it can really create anxiety for men and women. But women, I think, have a particular challenge because when we tend to think about men's, and in the church, we have spent a lot of time culturally talking about gender roles. And I think that's shifting a bit. But especially when I was growing up and in recent decades, there's a lot of focus on what women naturally are, and not as much focus on what men naturally are, but a lot of defining of what women are. And we tend to think of women as more spiritual than men, i.e., more innocent, less desire, less focus on sexuality. And we tend to think of men as being more naturally sexual and assertive and so on. And so, given those kind of cultural ideas, we've often taught a kind of cultural double standard. So even though our actual sexual ethic is a single standard, that in my research, a lot of women, most of the women I interviewed, had internalized a kind of double standard around sexuality. And that is that men could have sexual desire because they're men, but that women, if they did, it made them less spiritual, less feminine, less desirable. If men could have some sexual sin before marriage, that was understandable, but women really shouldn't. It was worse for women if they did. So it's just a transition into marriage then for many women felt like to be the ideal feminine was to suppress sexuality. And so when they married, they didn't have this sense of being a sexual being to utilize to create a sexual relationship. And so it can really interfere with creating desire. Like lots of women have thought, like, I shouldn't even think sexual thoughts, not even in marriage. And that's very difficult to create a sexual relationship if you feel like sexual thoughts are verboten, right? So there's just a kind of notion of femininity and sexuality that we think are incongruent culturally.
And you mentioned a word that you use a lot, agent.
Yes.
It seems like we don't frame sexuality, like women's sexuality, as their choice. It's like
That's right.
something you provide for someone else, not,
Absolutely.
you know.
Exactly. Right. I talk about this, that we talk to men about desire. We talk to women about desirability.
Mhm.
The young men's manual at the time I was writing my dissertation was choosing an eternal companion. The corollary lesson was preparing to become an eternal companion, right?
Mm,
So nobody's
mm,
scheming to do this. It's
right.
just in the culture. And so it's agent versus receptive and passive. And so a lot of the work I do is talking to women about desire, not just in the sexual realm, but in their lives. Like, how do you go and create a life that's an expression of your gifts, your desires, your values, right? So many of us have been taught to be in response to men, in response to our husbands and children, in response even sexually, which makes it very, very difficult to enjoy sex. Mhm.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating that desire is linked to not just sexual desire, but just being an agent in your own life
Absolutely.
in
Yeah,
general, right?
that's right.
And,
It was interesting because in the research that was very correlated. The women who
mm,
really kind of occupied an equal space in their marriage had good sexual relationships. They took their desires seriously. They took themselves seriously, and their spouse took them seriously.
mm,
So they really functioned more like collaborators and partners. And so they assumed that their sexual desire mattered, and they assumed that their pleasure mattered. It just was kind of intuitive for them. Where
mhm.
women who've grown up learning, like, to be the best kind of female, I should be desireless, I should not be so selfish. It really was linked to selfishness for a lot
Yeah.
of women. And so they kind of suppress their agency, even though we're a faith that really values agency as a moral driver in our development.
Mm. That selfish word I've heard
Yeah.
over and over
Oh,
again
yeah.
by LDS women. It's,
Yeah.
I call it the Mormon
Yeah.
S word, is like, but I don't want to be
Yeah.
selfish.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and having any desire or goals or dreams for yourself is often framed as selfish, right?
That's right. That's right.
What other characteristics did women who had a or have a fulfilling sexual life, what did they have in common? What other things?
Well, I did a qualitative study, so I can't say this is representative of the population, but the
Yeah.
women that I interviewed that had they valued the conservative sexual ethic. That is, they valued
Mm,
the law of chastity, they valued committed sexuality, and they actually saw it as actually working in their favor to expect fidelity from men, to expect commitment, to expect men to bring themselves and their emotional and and practical resources to partnership. But they didn't, so they valued that, but they didn't turn it into anything sexist. There was no sexism in it. So one of the
mm,
women I interviewed, for example, she had come out of a family where her parents had divorced at 12, and there was a lot of sexual, like, both parents were having a lot of sexual partners in her adolescence. And it was so linked to instability for her that
mm,
she really was like, I want the stability of church life. She gravitated towards it, but she valued her sexuality. She was excited about the fact that someday she would be sexual. So that's another thing. They saw sex as a good thing. They did
mm,
not, some of the women I interviewed felt shameful about it right from the start. Women who had good sexual relationships felt positive anticipation, even if they made very conservative choices through their adolescence. So this woman in particular, she was like, I'm all about the law of chastity, as in, I don't want what my parents have done,
mm,
but it wasn't shame based. It was desire based. So it was like her desire was to have a committed, loving sexual marriage. And so she was not claiming it out of, I'm bad if I don't, I should, I can't. Again,
mm,
it was her desire that was actually fostering the sacrifice of waiting, because she wanted the valuable asset of a committed partnership down the road. Oh, the other thing is, there was no double standard.
mm,
So, like, she and others like her, they didn't feel like, oh, I need to be chaste so a future spouse values me. They
Mm.
didn't think like that. It was like, no, I'm making decisions about how I want to be in relationship to my sexuality that I feel good about. But this is not about being a prize for someone else. This is about me living in a way that I feel is right. And so they didn't feel like they had to take care of men's egos when they were dating. And they didn't feel like their chastity was a gift. It was a way they wanted to be in relationship to sexuality to create a reality that they valued. Right. So it's out of that obedience, bad, trying to earn a self, and in
Mm.
that creative, agentic space, much, much more powerful.
Yeah. Did you find that age had anything to do with it? Because what you're talking about is just they had a self, right? They
That's right.
had
They had a self.
developed a self. And so I'm wondering if you
Right. Why did
found,
some forge a
yeah, why,
self and some
and
not?
some didn't. Yeah.
And you know what? I wasn't looking for causality when I
Mm.
was doing this research. So I've
Yeah.
often thought about it like, and it's not as clear as you might think, because some people came out of pretty stable families, but didn't necessarily move in that realm. Two of the women who were really strongly agentic, that's not a real word, but it should
Yeah.
be. That had
Well,
a
I
strong
think it
sense
is.
exactly. A strong sense of agency. Actually, had come out of somewhat challenging situations, but they were asserting a reality that they wanted. So they were kind of recognizing, I can't be passive in my life if I want a good life. And
Mm.
they were kind of using their relationship to God to create a self that they felt good about, like a God that believed in their value, believed in their potential, and to utilize that as a catalyst to create something better than what they were coming from. One of the women came from a very stable situation, but it wasn't as predictable
Mm.
as you would think, actually.
Darn, right?
I
Like when
know.
when we'd like to have the formula, I think, if those of us who are parents too, like, okay, how do
How
we
do you?
create like no sexual shame,
Right.
uh,
Right. I
help
do think there's
women know
things we
their
can,
agents and,
yes,
all of the good things, right?
I do think there's things we can do. I mean, I think that, just if I'm thinking about it, the parents were sometimes somewhat chaotic, but they didn't necessarily shame the children. So there's one thing, if you have a lot of anxiety about sexuality, or you're trying to tell your child to be something that makes you feel good, you feel safe, you're teaching your child to reference outside. I mean, we already do this as children. We naturally reference outside to figure out, am I okay? Am I enough? Okay, so we do. But if parents, when we're doing the right thing as parents, we're fostering our children's ability to start self-defining. What does it mean to you? How do you feel about that grade? What are your thoughts about how you could do better? But you're trying to get
Hmm.
your child to think about, I'm responsible for my life. And the parent needs to understand it that way. When a parent sort of exploits that child's natural referencing of the parent to get the child to do what makes the parent feel good, to do what makes the parent not be ashamed or afraid, but then you're kind of pressuring the child to keep the external earning muscle going rather than the self-defining muscle that really potentially comes on board in our late adolescence. That self-defining muscle. Yeah.
Mm, mm. I'm thinking just as a broader LDS culture, we kind of reinforce that external referencing
Yes, we do.
uh, frequently. So
Yeah,
it's like the people who developed that have done it kind of in spite of the pressure
that's right.
to
That's
reference
That's
external.
right. That's right. So it's true. So first of all, human beings love to control each other. We all do. Okay.
We hate
I mean,
we hate to control ourselves, but we like to control
that's
each
so
other.
true. It's so true. Do what makes me comfortable, right?
Yeah,
And I'm all for agency, except for when it comes to my kids, then I
yeah.
want to have control. But that is we naturally want others to validate us, and we want others to feel good about us. And so we're really good at trying to get others to do what makes us comfortable. We have a harder time self-defining, taking responsibility for ourselves. It's a function of maturation, but it's easy to go for the validation of other people. So culturally, it's no shocker that those are the things we reinforce. It's like, even if you go to New York City, There's certain clothing, certain ways of being that get status and others that don't. You go to, you go to a PTO, that, whatever. Everybody's got their rules about who gets status. And so it's not surprising that we do that in the church too. What are the behaviors that are going to make you likable or be seen as worthy or whatever?
Mhm.
I would say perhaps surprisingly, and it's kind of interesting, it's just making me think about some of the strongest people that I interviewed in terms of agency. In some ways, what it was that they kind of understood they had to take responsibility for their lives to have a life they felt good about, because there were elements around them that were kind of crumbling. So
Hmm.
so in a way, it's like the predictability of just doing all the rules. They were sort of disabused of that early on. Some of us
Mm.
still only get disabused of it after our kids have grown or whatever, and we're like, wait a minute, I did all the things and things didn't turn out like I thought. So it's often when we do obey everything and do what others want and we become disillusioned by it, that's often when a deeper form of self-definition, that muscle, starts to engage. And so it's often in crisis that we start to develop another level of strength within us.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Um, so let's talk about sexual shame. And that's been such an issue with the women I've worked with.
Mhm.
What can individuals or
Mhm.
women, particularly married or not, sexual, like engaging in
Mhm.
sexual behavior or not, what can we do individually and maybe as a culture to reduce that or
Mhm.
heal that shame?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, it varies across families. It depends a lot on how your parents thought about it. Did your parents like sex? Did they not? Did your mom recoil from touch? Did she lean into it? So you get a lot of messages just by the way your
Mm.
family relates to sexuality, to desire. I had a client who just, if you desired anything, like male or female, it was considered a weakness. And that's just like, just makes it so
Mm.
there's really no fertile ground for sexuality to thrive in. So I think that in many ways, what I would say is like to claim the best in our theology and to teach the best in our theology. When we're afraid, we tend to teach fear tactics to our children, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
fear tactics
And
around.
to adults.
Exactly. And to adults, exactly right. We do. We try to control each other with fear and anxiety. And it's hard to teach somebody beyond where you have come yourself. And so it's there, those messages are there. The thing is, the beauty of it is that our theology actually provides the possibility of a different view of the body, of sexuality, of joy, of pleasure, because we actually are a theology that embraces embodiment and sensuality and the eternal nature of sexuality. And so we can at least start with beginning to understand that it's a false tradition we've inherited. So what
Mm.
I do in my Art of Desire course is I spend the first bit just helping people even recognize the messages. Like some people are in shame and they don't even really know why. It's just they've kind of imbibed that belief and they're just kind of living in the product of it without standing back and saying, wait a minute, do I actually think that's fair or true or a right idea?
Hmm.
Because sometimes just making it come into relief enough to see it is like, wait, that's not fair. That's not true. How can I accept that idea? And so that helps to just start thinking about it and allowing yourself to start to consider, is that really an idea that I think is true or good for me? But even when we learn ideas, we still can have this kind of regressive self that's like, you should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you be sexual or whatever. And knowing that if sex and fear have been strongly linked, that's going to happen. Okay, your regressive brain is kind of there to keep you safe, and it can show up at very inconvenient times to tell you to be safe. You need to not be joyful, not have sex, not desire anything. But the more you can recognize it as regressive, as something that's kind of there pulling at you, the more you can try to soothe yourself around that and keep moving forward. Because my favorite definition of faith is belief in action. So you can say, I believe that sexuality is good, but I know it, but I don't feel it. Okay. So, but you act your way into the knowledge of it. That
Mm.
is, the more you step towards it, the more you realize the fruits of that are good. Like, okay, I'm claiming more of my desires and I'm actually feeling happier in my life. I'm claiming my sexuality. I'm telling myself my body is a good thing. And it scares me. And part of my mind wonders if I'm just being, um, evil. But the more I kind of claim it, the more I feel at peace and at ease. The better my partnership is getting if you're partnered, and the better that and you start to recognize, wait, this is true because it brings more peace into my life, because it makes me feel more whole, makes me feel less anxious, less apologetic. It allows me to feel like a strong person, and that is the measure of living by truthful principles.
Mm. I love that truth. What was it? Truth in action? Is that what you said?
Yeah, truth in action. Like we talk about, I
Yeah.
learned this as a kid in some primary class, I think, but like belief is just like, it's passive and faith is active. You
Faith.
actually
Yeah.
have to act out the belief. And it's faith that leads to knowledge, not belief. So faith is you act in the truth. And then the
Mm.
truth is clearer because when I work with clients, a lot of times it's very fun to talk about ideas. Ideas are easy. They don't stress us. But going and acting differently, right?
Yeah.
Telling your
Making
partner,
changes.
oh yeah, that's harder. You're outside of your comfort zone. You feel like an idiot. You're apologizing to your spouse about something that's been hurting them. That's uncomfortable. I don't like. So we'd rather think about the ideas, but it's in the action that our minds change, that we actually evolve in our understanding.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking about like that it if that takes action, it's hard to develop if you can't take sexual action, right? Like if
Mhm.
you have the ethic of not
Not being sexual.
not
Yeah.
being sexual for
Yes.
20 to 40 years or however,
Right. Yes.
how 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 do you
So yes,
develop
that's
that
true.
when
There,
you're
there's
not
no
acting?
question, right? There's no question that not, if you're choosing to not be sexual, you're going to limit your sexual development. There's only so much you can come to understand or know if you're not in a sexual relationship. At the same time, I wouldn't say that to be at peace with your sexuality requires sexual behavior. Because even choosing, like going back to some of the people in the research, was they were choosing actively to not be sexual because they desired to wait until marriage. But so
Mm,
they were in a kind of action. It's more that it was coming from a self-defining place. That's
right.
the issue. If it was like, I can't because then I'm terrible and no one will love me, that's a much more destructive place. And even if you're being sexual in marriage because you must, because your husband won't like you, whatever, that's also destructive, right? So
Mhm.
even if you're being sexual, but from that same, like, I have to earn my desirability, that's still going to harm your sense of self.
So it comes back to that self, that agency and having a self. Uh, so what I'm hearing you say is that the desire to wait is still desire, right?
Exactly
It's
right.
still, you're still
Exactly.
defining it
It's
and you're claiming
self-defining.
that
Yeah.
instead of I should or I shouldn't, and that you can still grow up into a point because you are still actively,
Self-defining.
yeah,
Mhm.
self-defining. I love
Exactly.
that. That's
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think we kind of live in a culture is in reaction to the repressive sexual ethic and saying
Mhm.
like but I think what we've kind of lost in that is that so often good things in our lives are come through constraining ourselves in a agentic way. Like we are choosing, I'm going to hit this tennis ball 40 times in this way, even though I'm bored and I'm frustrated, but I'm going to discipline myself because I want to create another reality in my life. And that, again, if it's coming out of shame, it's going to undermine our self-confidence. But if it's coming out of desire, it makes us stronger if we're living up to our higher selves and doing it.
Mm. What can we do as those of us who are parents to help our daughters develop desire just in
Mhm.
general and then also sexually?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best things you can do, and this is kind of hard because this is the hardest thing, but the more you are at peace with your body and your sexuality, the more you're teaching your daughter, just transmitting that it is a great thing to be a woman. It's a great thing to be female. A female body is a wonderful thing that you can enjoy your, just enjoy being who you are. That in and of itself is a gift. And especially if your daughter sees you valuing your life and claiming your life and making choices that you can back up and feel good about, you're giving her permission to do the same. That's what it means to be female. And I don't need to feel, I've worked with clients where their mother kind of suppressed herself and then they want something different, but they feel guilty kind of moving into a different realm, almost like I need to validate my mom's life or else she's going to feel even worse. And if we unshackle our kids from that by just living our life in a way that is rich and that we respect, we give them permission. And I think when we're living our lives in a way we can respect, we're being true to ourselves and we're being true to others. And I know that can feel difficult to figure out what that means, but you're not betraying your responsibilities to your children or your marriage, but you're not betraying your responsibility to yourself either. And you're looking for a way to thrive in your life while being a parent, if you're a parent, while being a partner, if you're a partner. And that gives your daughter the view that a woman can love and be deeply invested in her children and thrive in her life and develop herself and be at peace. So
this is the theme of my life. Like that was the question growing up, like, can an LDS woman be a good wife and mother and have like an amazing life
that's why I didn't get
outside of
married
that?
till I was 29, because I was like, I was so afraid that, because I think we grew up in a similar time, which is, I was really taught, like, you need to be selfless and you take on his name and you follow him and you do. And I just wanted to belong to myself too. And so I just thought, it's not that I didn't want to marry, I just wanted to have both. So it took me till I was 29 to get clear that I could have both.
Well, and I married at 20, had a baby at 21 and had a music career and went to grad school. And so I kind of was like,
you did it. You're like, I'm doing it.
I'm doing it. And it wasn't, if I can do this, it's how are we going to figure this out together?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's
great.
But you're talking about like the theme of my life is this even possible? Right. Because growing up, I didn't see a model of that at all anywhere.
Right. Exactly. And this isn't to say, like, in my view, that like that you can't choose agentically to say, I'm going to be home. It's what I choose. It's what I desire. I don't mean like you have to try to do everything all at once, of course. But again, it's that self-defining piece rather than I'll be what you want me to be, just love me, That's much harder.
It's having a self and choosing to focus solely on home and family that's a valid choice if it's a choice, right? Like,
that's right. If
you're
a self-defined reality, it's absolutely a choice.
Yeah. So I'm glad you made that distinction, because sometimes when I get going, I forget to make that clarification. Like, oh no, please don't feel like you have to do it the way I did. Do it the way you want to do it and feel good about it and own it and take responsibility.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about single LDS women and sexuality. I get a lot of DMs about like, well, how do I what is sexuality if I'm not choosing to be sexual actively? Like, how can I claim my sexuality?
Yeah. Well, it comes down to that same thing, which is, I think a lot of times an implicit message in our culture is, if you just do what others, if you just obey, if you comply, everything's going to work out for you eventually. And I think there's a time and place for that idea when we're young, but I think as adults, we have to grow into that self-authoring position of, I have to decide what I feel right about and to claim that choice. amongst my difficult choices, right? But a lot of us, a lot of people, I want to be sexual and obey the law of chastity. I want to have, and I can't have both things. And so it pushes when we have realities, how to say it, it's like these pressure points where we want two legitimate things, but we can't have both. They pressure the issue of self-definition more than anything else. Okay, I want two legitimate things. I only get one. Which one can I back up? Which one can I personally feel good about? Which losses can I best tolerate? I know.
Wait, stop for a second.
Good.
Which losses can I best tolerate? That is so good.
Yeah.
That is so good.
Right. It's not the way we want to think, because people are like, can't I pay you for the option where I don't have any losses?
Right. I don't want losses, but which losses can I tolerate? I've just never heard it framed like that. So thank you. That's really, really helpful.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you because I was like, boom, that's.
Yeah. Because life is just, we want do all the things and get all the things. And who doesn't want it? But life is really about tolerating loss, and the more wisely we choose our losses when we have choices, I think the better we do. And but it does push on us responsibility, and when we don't want that responsibility, we'll look for other people to tell us what to do. But the more we do that, the harder it is to kind of live in our choices without them eroding our strength and eroding our peace of mind, because we feel kind of controlled by the validation of others, and we start to resent that we don't have the things we want. Where if it's like, look, I have a hard choice, and which one do I want? Which one do I value? Which do I feel good about? And I think there's people who could choose a life of chastity out of that strong place and do all right, because it's coming from their integrity. It's coming from, and it doesn't mean there's no loss there, to be clear.
Right.
But it's resting on a foundation they feel good about, right?
Yeah.
And again, tell me what to do. But I think as adults, we have to resist that and lean into our integrity.
And take the consequences or the results, right? And not put it on someone else.
Right.
Yeah. So much of what you shared comes back to this self-development and agency.
Yes.
And I just think that applies to so much more than just our sexuality, right? Like that's how you create a meaningful existence.
It is exactly. And it's also what makes life easier, because I sometimes told this story, like we earned money for college ourselves. And so my siblings, we painted houses. So one summer I was painting for my brother, painting exteriors, and I was his employee. I hated it because he controlled everything, but he was the reference point. So when are we leaving? When is lunch? How many windows do I have to paint? And I just hated it. Like the summer dragged on forever and the days dragged on forever. The next summer I decided I'm going to do my own and do interiors. And then I hired my sister. Well, guess what? I got to be twice as fast as a painter. I was still doing hard work, probably harder work, but because I owned it, it didn't feel as hard. It's like, I want this goal. I want to earn this much money. Of course, guess who hated the job was my sister. Who's like, what's going on? How much longer?
Yeah.
So it's like just moving into that self-defining role makes life easier, because you're carrying the weight, because you're trying to create something you believe in.
I love that. Gosh, so many good little nuggets, Jennifer.
We should do this more.
I know. People were like, "Oh my gosh, you the two of you are getting together for a podcast," or So it was like, yeah, I know. I'm so excited too, because I have just long been an admirer of your work and how clear you are in addressing really complex, nuanced areas of life and in LDS existence and marriages. And so, yeah, I just thank you for your such, I'm just fangirling here. So yeah, let's throw out the opportunity for people to ask some questions.
Sure.
Um, it's very hard to navigate LDS sexuality without church bashing. It's a fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope we've walked that line today, because
Yeah.
I don't think it's yeah,
Well,
that's
I'll say
definitely
one
not my
thing,
goal.
sort of because I do think um, sort of what the sort of sexual liberal ethic is like any restraint is shame. Any kind of inhibition
Mm,
is not claiming your sexuality. And I just think that's just simply not true, because you don't want to just have gas or just have brakes. If you really want to be the agent, you need to know how to have gas and brakes. That sexuality is a good thing. And I can make choices in a way that's creating the life and the reality that I want. Very similar with food, right? You don't want to just be compulsive. You don't want to be anorexic. You want to be able to find that ability to regulate around that sensuality to create the life that you want.
mhm,
So the having principles around our sexuality and learning to inhibit is valuable. It's only
mm,
when in those early stages it's heavy-handed shaming, sex and Satan are, right together, ready to take you down. That
mm,
works against integrating sexuality and creating a joyful life, which is our goal, right?
yeah,
So we want the breaks. We just don't want them to smash the organism. Okay. We don't want to destroy the joyfulness, which is a part of our theology. So yeah.
mm, yeah. Yes, women are that they might have joy.
Yes.
So I'd love to know how to encourage this type of self-defined agentic living in my children.
Yeah. Well, something I think is really good is, first of all, there's a whole bunch of research on this that, would cover this much better than I'm about to say it, but just that growth mindset versus that static mindset. So anything about sort of that you are a creator and an actor and you're an evolver, so that you're focused not on the product and how the child looks, but emphasizing their ability to develop and create. Um, Also, teaching them a self-reference. It's not that you can't have a response, but you're not the measure. Helping them learn to be a self-measure, right? How do you feel about that? What do you think might work better next time, right? You're facilitating that internal. And then goal setting, right? Something we did a lot in young women's, around like, what is it that you desire? What is it that you want to create? Really teaching that ability to take the resources that you've been given and that you can create something that matters to you. You're not just trying to please. What is it that you'd feel good about if you were to do this year in school? Or what would you feel good about if you were in 10 years to become this? What are you aiming towards?
Mm.
Because again, it's just teaching that self reference. And your child might say, I have no idea. And that's okay. But it's
But
just
think
a
about it, right?
question. It's a good
Yeah.
question for you to think about. Exactly.
Yeah. Um, some great questions. Let's see. How can I navigate claiming sexuality when I have had sexual abuse as a child and have adopted shame and repulsion in anything sexual?
Yeah. So hard.
Therapy. You
Yeah.
need,
It's
yeah,
absolutely doing
get
therapy
therapy. Hmm.
100% and kind of working through a lot of those meanings. And what happens often is that the person being abused, their mind is looking to protect, as it should, and
Yeah.
often then says reject sexuality because sexuality is the way in which I have become unsafe. It's a very natural response. I think often what a good therapy program does is help you to reclaim sexuality as a way to belong to yourself, not as a validation of the abuse. And so you're taking back what always was yours and never should have been taken from you. And you know, it's a way of reclaiming your strength, reclaiming your body, reclaiming your dignity, right? That's the focus. But it's hard work because again, that limbic brain is often jumping in there trying to send the signal that this is what makes you unsafe. And so it's being kind and fair and compassionate to yourself around the difficulty of working with your fears and working with those regressive moments to expand your life.
Thank you. Great response. Therapy, good therapist who specializes in sexual abuse can help you with that for definitely.
Yes.
Any advice for women who are higher desire and feel rejected or shame when they are rejected?
That is hard. And I think a lot of times because, going back to sort of the cultural messaging is men desire, women are desirable. So, for many women who feel like I'm not desired, right? It can be really painful because it's like, what is wrong with me? This is like, or what's wrong with my husband, because we're not living it the way we've been taught. And so on the one hand, people are just so much more varied than any cultural script will give you, right?
Yeah.
I've heard many people where the woman is the higher desire, the man's the lower desire, and it's just kind of how they're built, and one, embraces pleasure and sensuality more easily than the other, and they aren't helped by adding that layer of cultural meaning because it's not really, how to say that, while it's often lonely for the higher desire person, it's not fair to women to say I must be extra unattractive or extra problematic, because it's just not helpful. I think it's also true, though, that women's sexuality is often, if you look at research of women's fantasies, women's desire, it's often the themes are around being the most desirable, being highly desirable, being selected. Like the man notices you among other options and is compelled by your beauty, your attractiveness. So I think there's not just culture in that. I do think there's even some hard wiring for some of that, like that's the man, the woman opens up to the man who is specifically attracted to her, desires her, wants her.
Yeah.
So if a woman doesn't feel desired or feels like she has to do the initiating, it's often going against what makes sex the most desirable for her, right? It's not in line with what her fantasies are. And so it can be a tricky situation. And I would say, it's obviously just beginning to have some conversations around it. Is it that my spouse, it's easy as the low desire person, whether male or female, to kind of take advantage of the other person's higher desire. And what I mean by that is, they're going to initiate, they desire you, so you don't have to give them as many signals that you desire them because you feel secure in having their attention and their pursuit.
Okay, wait a second. Yeah, I haven't heard it framed that way. That it's taking advantage of. It's kind of being lazy about your sexuality and your relationship.
Right. And, a lot of higher desire people, male or female, it just hurts because they never feel desired. Right? And while it can be a pain if you're the lower desire and you've got this person who always wants, you're like, no.
Yeah.
You may not like that, but you always are reassured that the focus is on you, right?
Yeah.
You have their engagement, their attention. And so it can be easy to kind of hide in being the low desire person. Let them initiate, let them want it. You can hold out longer, so you do, or whatever. And I think it's just not, it's not kind. It's not fair. I mean, I don't mean you have to pretend more desire than you do, but more out of an active agency and kindness and partnership of like, I don't want to take advantage of the higher desire person. I want to, do things to foster my own desire, but also just be invested in showing their desirability, showing that I'm attracted, right? Letting them feel that from me because it's kind and it's fair and it's part of a good sexual friendship. And so
I like that. It's kind and fair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just think exactly. And so it's coming again more out of that integrity place, not just a reactive place. Well, I don't feel it. Sometimes people say, what do you want me to do? Fake it? And I mean, no, you never fake it, but it's like, am I being fair? Am I being kind? If I were in the higher desire position, would I feel that my spouse was phoning it in, not really bringing their best? And if I wouldn't like it, then maybe I need to do something about myself if I'm being lazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like choice. Like, what am I
Yeah.
choosing? Because sex isn't just a reaction. It's
That's right.
you have choice
That's right. That's right.
in the interaction.
That's right. Right. A
Yeah.
lot of us want the idea that our body's determining, well, I can't, my body's,
Yeah. I
but
don't
women
want,
often have responsive desire anyway.
right.
Seldom are women just being driven by their body. But that's different than whether or not you're choosing to create a good sexual relationship. It's a very different question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Jennifer, our time is almost up.
Yeah.
Let's take maybe one more question, and then I want you to kind of let people know how they can connect more with you.
Great.
Um, let's see. Let's do this one. How to handle when one partner prefers 10 to 15 minutes and the other partner prefers hour-long sex.
I'm wondering which one is which. Is the woman wants shorter or longer? Does that person want to say?
Yeah,
Different
if
meaning.
you women shorter,
Okay, got it.
woman
Good. That's
shorter. Okay.
helpful to know because
Yeah,
sometimes women need more time and you
right.
want it, you want the sexual relationship to orient to the women's response pattern. So that is to say, you want men that can sustain longer for them to both have good sex, but that would be a whole different one. We can do that one sometime. But but uh but I would be thinking a little bit about what's happening in the marriage that the woman wants shorter. Sometimes we want shorter because so I'll give you two different possibilities. We want less contact, right? We just want to get the deed done, be done, because we don't want the connection. Now, if you don't want the connection, why not? Like, what's going on? Is it that your spouse is smothering, needy, right? There's something in which they're taking kind of in the frame of sex, but it feels like you feel suffocated a little bit.
Mm,
Then you need to think about like, and it can be both and here, but you can think about like what's going on between us that dynamic is a part of sex and making it less desirable. Is it that the one that wants 15 minutes is intimacy avoidant, right? Just wants maybe the pleasure of sex, but doesn't really want the engagement and the connection and the investment and doesn't want to step into the partnership fully, and therefore is just trying to keep it as cursory as possible. So those are just, now it's probably both, right? It's often
mm.
the more the one is kind of a little walled, the more this one gets hungry and smothering, and the more hungry and smothering, the more walled. And that's
Yeah.
just a typical dynamic. But becoming somewhat in my enhancing sexual intimacy course, I'm helping people to look at the dynamics that they're creating and recreating naturally in their sexual relationship that make sex less desirable. And so when they start to see it, then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm a smotherer. I'm always trying to get when the getting's good. And this person's like, wait a minute, I'm not very open-hearted too. So I can see why I invite that. And so
Yeah.
if they can each become self-aware, they can break that dynamic and create something that feels richer and deeper.
Mm. All right. Thank you. So Dr. Finlayson Fife, where can people get more of your
Sure.
courses,
Yeah.
where are you on social media?
So finlaysonfife.com with a hyphen in between. Finlaysonfife.com, you can see I have 5 courses there. You can read about them, but there's basically there's a women's self and sexual development course and a men's self and sexual development course. 2 couples courses on how to create a good marriage, the relationship course. Sexuality courses, how to create a good sexual relationship, and then how to talk to your kids, how to not screw up your kids around sex. So we have those 5 courses. and then and then also I have a podcast called Room for Two where I'm doing couples coaching. So I'm working with couples around these dynamics around sex and intimacy, like emotional and sexual intimacy, and helping them see how they're participating in these dynamics that are often intuitive but painful, and how to break them. So I teach a lot of
Mm,
principles in the courses, and you can see me apply the principles in the work I do with the couples. And so, yeah.
okay. So again, I highly recommend uh, Dr. Finlayson Fife's courses. Thank
Sure.
you again for your time today.
You're
This
very
was
welcome.
This is so helpful, and there's all this love in the chat. I'm not sure if you're seeing it, but just lots of love and thanks for your expertise and for the work that you do to help our community. So
Awesome.
thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all of you. I'm just so thrilled that so many people joined us live. I think that just makes it kind of fun, and maybe we'll have to do this again.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.